Today we're going to think about applying for research grants. So just a little bit about my research. Um, I have been interested in how we can use technology to connect schools together, because in Northern Ireland, 93% of children attend schools that are mainly either Catholic or Protestant. And even outside of school, the children don't always have opportunities to mix together. So one of the projects that I've been involved in was a project involving Lego bricks. So you can see in the photograph here, we've got children from two different schools. Our children all wear school uniform. So you can actually tell, in this case, the children with the dark blue and the number 25 are from a Catholic school, and the children in the kind of burgundy or yellow clothes are from a Protestant school. So we asked these children to use Lego bricks to design and build their city of the future, a place that they could live in comfortably. This is important because many towns in Northern Ireland reflect the separation and the division that is the case in schools. So, for example, some of the housing areas might be predominantly Protestant or predominantly Catholic. Some of the games that are played are quite distinctive to each group. So I wonder if you would just put a little message into the chat box, just to sort of say in a few words, what kind of research are you interested in? Could you do that? Just a very short one line to say what you're interested in. Okay, that's good. Thank you for that. Oh, somebody's interested in AI. Yeah, great. Um, we also have begun to think about the role of AI in peace building, but it's at a very early stage. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Um, if you have particular questions that you want to ask, you can put a question in the chat box. Um, if that if you feel more comfortable doing that than speaking. So I'm going to go on to my next slide, and I'm going to suggest to you that applying for research grants is really a three-stage process. What I'm going to call the pre-proposal, the proposal itself, and then the post-proposal, what happens afterwards. Obviously, your universities will have their own ethos and their own particular areas of interest when it comes to research. But my first point here, how does your initial idea fit into any emerging themes in your department? In other words, I can't really just go off and do my own thing without taking notice of what my colleagues are also doing, because all of our research is assessed every 4 or 5 years, and there needs to be some coherence around our research. Rather than 20 individuals each doing quite separate things, we try to make sure that our research fits into broad themes. For example, the role of technology in learning. So I think the first thing to think about when you're applying for a research grant is, how does your initial idea fit into the work that your colleagues are doing? in your own department. Um, if you're working, of course, with colleagues in another university, you need to think about how is it going to fit in with what they do. We are increasingly encouraged to think about how might the research have impact on theory, policy, or practice. Um, Again, I'd be interested to know whether those are important issues for you, but certainly for us, increasingly because we're funded by the public, people want to make sure that the research has real relevance. Okay, across to here. Um, oh, sorry. Can I just go back? Forgive me. Yeah. So, you know this. Clearly, you got to carry out a thorough research of the literature around your topic to establish what key issues have already been addressed. And then from that to say, how's your own research going to be seen as original, significant, and methodologically robust? Those those three words in red are particularly important for us, and also for the people who decide if they're going to give us research funding. So originality, significance, and methodological robustness. In my case, I also wanted to think about how the research was going to connect with my teaching, um, because I didn't want there to be a disconnect between my research and the students that I was working with. So again, that might be something that's important for you to think about as well. Okay, I'm going to go on to the next slide, if that's okay. Um, One key issue for me and perhaps for you as well is whether you're going to be working on your own or in a team. In other words, are you going to be a lone ranger or are you going to be part of a group? So I would advise that you look very carefully about the submission rules if you're looking for money, um, because sometimes the person who is the principal investigator, the PI, that that person it has the research grant allocated to them. Might be an important thing if you're ever seeking promotion. So you do need to think carefully about that. Um, in my experience, I can say I've nearly always been part of a team, and the great thing is to try and find out the particular strengths of each member of the team. For example, right now I'm working with a younger colleague who is absolutely excellent at social media. So whenever we do anything with Lego, she's putting reports and photographs up um, to alert people to the work that we're being done. And my final point is that in in my university, in the School of Education, we have a research coordinator. And I would say it's very important for me anyway to talk to the research coordinator and say, look, I'm thinking of putting in an application to the Nuffield Foundation or the Economic and Social and Research Council. In other words, there are people in your institution who will probably have real expertise and knowledge about which funder is going to be most likely to look favorably on your application. Okay. This is just another photograph of the children working on their Lego town of the future. Um, but before we embarked on this particular um, project, which we subsequently wrote up and published, we did a small scale pilot study. We wanted to work out if this was really going to work. So, for example, in this case, we decided that the children should be in mixed teams. So one of the teams was asked to look at places of worship. Should there be a Catholic church, Protestant church, Orthodox church, Hindu temple, mosque, and so on? Another group were looking at schools. Do we want to have Catholic schools, Protestant schools, or do we want to have integrated schools? So each of the teams had a specific area of the town to work on, and we needed to find out if the teams that we thought were the right ones were actually going to work. These children are about 11 years old, and you can see in this photograph that we worked very closely indeed with the two teachers in the schools. They basically ran the entire project with a little bit of guidance from us. The guy sitting over on the right-hand side there is an official from our education authority. So like the Board of Education. And again, I make that point because when you're doing research involving schools, it's important to talk to your Department of Education. In other words, whoever is responsible for funding schools, you need to talk to them to find out if they can help you in some way. Uh, and at the very least, for you to alert them to the kind of research that you're doing. Um, okay, just my last point there. We certainly learned a lot from doing a pilot. Um, and that last point, seek out training and mentoring. Um, I will be the first to admit I'm not very good at quantitative analysis. Um, so I decided that the best approach was rather than me becoming an expert, that we needed to make sure we had somebody in the team who was very good on quantitative analysis. Okay. Hope you're okay with me. Um, can I just ask you in the chat box, can you just say if you're following okay? Um, I don't want to carry on talking too much without getting some kind of feedback from you. So could you just put a little chat in to say yes, or it's okay, or this is interesting. Um, maybe you want to say, could you tell us something about X? That's great. Thank you. Uh, good. Yes, that's the kind of thing. Thank you very much for those quick comments. Right, perfect. Okay. But please also, you're very polite. Be honest as well. If I'm speaking too fast or you can't understand me, please put a message in the box. Right, I'm going to go on to my next slide. Okay, I don't know how important this is for you, but for us, the ethical dimension is absolutely critical. And in the UK, most universities would say that if your research is going to involve anybody under the age of 18, or if they are considered to be vulnerable, you have to be especially careful. And in my institution, it basically means that it will take you a lot longer to get ethical approval if your study is going to involve children. So that you need to build that extra time in to your overall planning. So in the School of Education, there is an ethics committee. And if I put in a research that involves adults, for example, teachers, the school can decide, yes, that's okay, or we'd like to suggest some changes. But if it involves children, the School of Education Ethics Committee has to send the proposal on to a university-wide ethics committee. In other words, I'm just trying to say it's taken very, very seriously. And actually, this is something new compared. Well, I first joined the university in 1986, and I'm pretty sure that at that time, the ethical dimension was not a priority, but it has become so. Maybe we'll get a chance to talk about whether that's important for you guys as well. Okay, on we go. This is just a little example of what I have to do if I want to get ethical approval. I've got to submit a project protocol. That's a 6-page project description. I've got to fill in another form, information on ethical issues, for example, how confidentiality, anonymity, the right to withdraw are handled. I've got to fill in another form for about risk assessment. There has to be a participant information sheet if you're going to do an interview. There's got to be a consent form for the interview or a survey. You've got to submit the draft questions for interview and the questionnaire. And then you've got to fill in a checklist to show that you've considered everything. So can I ask you very briefly to use the chat box just to say, oh, yeah, well, we do something like this, or perhaps maybe you can say, surprised to see that all of this is required. Uh, I would just say to you that if you are applying for international research grants, I'm pretty sure they will expect that you have got fairly clear ethical consideration built into your proposal. So can we use the chat box again, please, briefly, just as a quick word about is ethics an important thing for you to have to think about in any application that you make? Okay, thank you very much. People are saying yes, it's important for you as well. Um, okay, good. Um, fine. Now, um, just let me check I didn't go too fast. All right. Apologies. Right. Good. Um, next slide. So where exactly can you find information about who might give you the money? So in my university, we have a research office. They regularly send us out information about possible research funds. So that's the first place. And that's especially useful if you're looking for a small amount of money to do a um, short-term project. I came across that link that you can see I've got on the slide there. Um, I'm sure you know about that. You've just got to be very, very resourceful in looking, and then you've got to check whether you are eligible to apply. You've got to look at the priorities of the funder and whether your proposal is going to be a good fit. So my advice is always to network as much as you can. In other words, reach out to other colleagues and other universities to help you in your quest for funding. Okay, everybody, I'm going to move on to the next one, if that's okay. So all of that was the pre-proposal. This is where you're actually filling in the form. So things to think about. If you're part of a team, what are your areas of expertise? How do they match the funder's requirements? Um, I don't know whether my second point is relevant for you, but um, certainly when I was working full time in the university, I always tried to make sure that I got enough money in the research grants to cover some of my teaching. In other words, there was money for me to be able to employ somebody else to do part of my work. Um, so that was important for me. Um, and at the same time, I needed to check with our human resources people um, exactly how much money needed to be set aside for that cover. Third point, some universities try to secure overheads. In other words, when a proposal goes in, they try to make sure that there's enough money there to cover the cost of heating, lighting, and the use of office space. I don't know whether that's something which you encounter or not, but it's certainly very important for us. In some cases, the university tries to put a 20% level of overhead on any proposal that we put forward. Again, can I ask you just to use the chat box to say something about this slide? For example, you could say something about your area of expertise, or you might say something about whether your university charges overheads. So just like you to react to that slide, if you would. If we could just bring up the chat box again. I can't see it on my screen. Sorry. Thanks very much, folks. Okay. Um, good. So if we're all okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide. Okay. Now this is where you're thinking about how you're going to manage the, you're putting in a bid. You want to tell the funder that you've got a very clear plan as to how the whole project's going to roll out. So, again, apologies if this is obvious, but some people find it very useful to use software tools like a Gantt chart to help plan the different stages of the project. What this can do is to help you create milestones, and if you're part of a big team, keep them all focused on what work has to be done at each part of the project. So that could include things like consulting with stakeholders, your Department of Education. It might um, enable you to say, right, we need to get the literature review completed by a certain date. We've got to design the data collection tools and so on. Okay. I'm I'm sure you're looking at this thinking, what's this guy doing? Um, it is surprising how often we can make mistakes in our presentation. Um, so you've got to think about the structure of your presentation, and that includes language, grammar, punctuation, and readability. So you'll see those links there. I'm sure Lena will share my slides with you. But reviewers say avoid long passages of dense, unstructured text. Think about the use of tables, figures, and graphics, and get someone to do a pre-submission review. Okay, um, I'm going to move on to the next one, if that's okay. So you might wonder how are decisions taken when you've sent in a proposal? So before they even look at the detail, they're going to check for eligibility and completeness. And if you pass those two checks, your proposal is probably going to go out for peer review. And that means it's going to be graded, which will lead to decisions taken and communicated. And if you're lucky, you're going to get some feedback. So I can't stress enough how important that is because I've had a few examples where I've applied for research funds, was unsuccessful, but got very helpful feedback, which then enabled me to put in a stronger proposal the next time. Okay. So what criteria are going to be used in by the funders when they're making judgments? They're going to say, is the overall proposal sound? Is it asking a relevant and pertinent research question with good methodology? Does it have a feasible timescale? Does the team have enough experience? Is there evidence of user consultation? And is it good value for money? So, in other words, when you're putting your proposal together, you might want to think about these uh, criteria because that's what you're likely to be judged on. Okay, folks, I'm going to move on if that's okay. Um, so, what happens after you've sent the proposal in? Well, the first thing, as I've just said, is don't be too deflated if your proposal's turned down. 65% of proposals are rejected. If the funder has not given you feedback, you should request that. And when you get it, I think it's important to bring your team together to review and reflect, to revise what you've done and resubmit. So I can say from many years' experience, this isn't easy. And if you manage to get research grants, it's a real cause for celebration. So this was a project that we successfully applied to the European Union Horizon funds for a project which was called Repurposing Education through Blended Learning. And it emerged from the COVID pandemic. And we wanted to try and capture the experiences of schools and get some sense about whether the closing of schools and the moving of learning online had led to schools thinking fundamentally about the purpose of teaching and learning. Okay, well, this is my last slide. Um, I'd like you to use the chat box if you would like to. Was there one takeaway point from what I've said that you want to hold on to? Um, Secondly, what actions might you take as a follow-up? Can you put your comments